The courtroom was quiet, too quiet. Not the kind of silence that feels peaceful, but the kind that hums with tension like the air before a storm breaks. Everyone stood as the heavy oak doors at the back of the room swung open. Bailiffs straightened their posture. Lawyers smoothed their jackets. Even the court reporter paused mid-sip of coffee. Then she walked in. She wasn't tall, but she carried herself like someone who'd spent a lifetime earning every inch of space she occupied. Her dark suit was crisp, her silver-streaked hair pulled back neatly, and her eyes, calm, steady, and sharp, swept the room in one smooth glance. This was her courtroom, not because of the flag in the corner or the seal above the bench, but because everyone in it knew she'd spent decades defending the very idea of fairness, long before she ever wore a robe. And then there was him. He sat in the front row, legs crossed, phone in hand, scrolling like he was waiting for a coffee order, not a federal hearing. His suit probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, and he wore it like armor, something to remind the world he didn't need to follow the same rules as everyone else. He'd built an empire on disruption, on tearing down old systems and calling it progress. To him, tradition was just another word for weakness. When the judge entered, the entire room rose, except him. He didn't even look up. A few people glanced his way, then quickly looked back at the bench, hoping no one would notice. But of course she noticed. Judges notice everything. She paused for half a second, just long enough for the silence to deepen, then walked to her seat and sat down without a word. Still, he didn't stand. A murmur rippled through the gallery. Not loud, just a soft shuffle of discomfort. One of his own lawyers leaned over and whispered something urgent. He finally looked up, smirked, and said, just loud enough for the front rows to hear, "Standing's optional, right?" It wasn't. In federal court, rising when the judge enters isn't just polite. It's a sign of respect for the law itself. It's a small ritual, but it matters. It says that no matter how rich, famous, or powerful you are, you're still subject to the same system as everyone else. That's the whole point. But he'd never really believed that. He'd grown used to boardrooms where people jumped when he spoke, to private jets that waited on his schedule, to assistants who smoothed every bump in his path before he even saw it coming. To him, rules were for people who couldn't afford to bend them. And today's hearing? Just another nuisance. A minor speed bump in a life built on ignoring speed limits. The case itself wasn't glamorous. It involved a subpoena he'd ignored again, in a lawsuit about misleading advertising for one of his company's products. Regulators claimed his team had hidden safety complaints. He claimed it was overregulation killing innovation. The truth was probably somewhere in the middle, but he wasn't here to find it. He was here because his legal team finally convinced him that skipping court entirely might actually backfire. Now, sitting in that polished wooden chair, he looked more bored than nervous. He tapped his foot, checked his watch, and let out a quiet sigh like he was doing everyone a favor by showing up at all. The judge adjusted her glasses and opened the case file. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't glare. She simply began. "Counsel," she said, "please confirm your client understands the purpose of today's contempt hearing." His lawyer stood quickly. "Your Honor, my client is fully aware." "Is he?" she interrupted gently, because I noticed he didn't rise when the court entered. The room went still again. The lawyer froze. The billionaire finally looked up. Surprised, not angry, just caught off guard. Like someone who'd forgotten they left the stove on. "I didn't think it was a big deal," he said, shrugging. The judge tilted her head slightly. "You're in a federal courtroom. Everything here is a big deal." There was no anger in her voice. "Just clarity," like she was explaining gravity to someone who'd never seen rain. He opened his mouth to respond, then closed it. For the first time all morning, he looked unsure. What followed wasn't a shouting match or a dramatic showdown. It was something quieter, and far more unsettling for someone used to winning every argument. The judge asked simple questions. "Do you know why we rise when the judge enters? Have you ever been held in contempt before? Do you believe the law applies equally to all citizens?" Each one was polite, precise, and impossible to dodge without sounding either ignorant or arrogant. And with every answer, he dug himself deeper, not because he was lying, but because he genuinely didn't see the problem. To him, respect was something you earned through wealth or influence. He didn't understand that in this room, respect flowed from the institution, not the individual. Meanwhile, the judge listened carefully. She took notes. She let silences hang just long enough to make people uncomfortable. She wasn't trying to embarrass him, she was giving him a chance to catch himself. But he didn't. By the time the first hour ended, the mood in the room had shifted. The gallery, mostly journalists, a few law students, and a couple of concerned citizens, watched him differently now. Not with awe, but with something closer to pity, because power without humility is just noise, and in a place built on quiet dignity, noise doesn't last long. When the judge finally called for a short recess, she didn't announce any punishment. She didn't threaten jail or fines. She simply said, "Mr. Last Name, please remain in the courtroom during the break." He blinked. "Why?" "Because I asked you to," she replied. And for the first time that day, he did as he was told. Outside, the city buzzed on, cars honking, people rushing to lunch, the world turning as if nothing unusual had happened. But inside that courtroom, something had shifted. Not because of a gavel or a ruling, but because one woman refused to let arrogance go unchallenged. And what she would do next? Well, that would surprise everyone, including him. The break lasted only 10 minutes, but it felt like an eternity to him. He sat alone in the front row, arms crossed, staring at the polished floor as if it might offer an escape route. His phone buzzed twice. Messages from his assistant, his PR team, maybe his lawyer, but he didn't check. For once, the constant stream of notifications felt irrelevant. What mattered now was the quiet weight of the room itself, the tall windows letting in pale afternoon light, the faint scent of old wood and paper, the distant hum of the city muffled by thick walls. It was a space built for reflection, not reaction, and that unnerved him more than any fine or threat ever could. Across the hall, in her chambers, the judge sipped black coffee from a chipped mug that read, "World's Okayest Judge," a gift from a former law clerk. She wasn't plotting revenge. She wasn't even thinking about him much at all. Her mind was already on the next case, a housing dispute involving elderly tenants facing eviction. But she knew what she'd seen in there. Not just disrespect, but a deeper kind of blindness. The kind that comes from living so long in a bubble of privilege that you forget other people exist unless they serve you. She'd seen it before. Not always from billionaires, sometimes from politicians, celebrities, even everyday folks who'd convinced themselves the rules didn't apply to them. But this one was different. He wasn't just rude. He was genuinely confused about why anyone would expect him to stand, like the idea of shared respect was foreign to him. When court reconvened, she walked in slowly. Again, everyone rose. This time he stood too, hesitant, almost mechanical, but she didn't acknowledge it. She simply took her seat and picked up where she left off. "Mr. Last Name," she began. "You said earlier that standing didn't seem like a big deal. Can you explain what you meant by that?" He shifted in his chair. I didn't think it was required. I've been in court before and no one ever made a thing out of it." "Interesting," she said, "because federal court rules clearly state that all present must rise when the judge enters. It's not about me personally. It's about recognizing that this courtroom represents something larger than any one person, rich or poor, famous or unknown." He opened his mouth, then closed it. He wanted to argue, to say something clever, but the words wouldn't come. Because deep down he knew she was right. He just didn't want to admit it. Not here, not now, not in front of strangers. Then she did something unexpected. Instead of pressing the contempt charge, she began asking about his company. Not the flashy headlines or the stock price, but the real stuff. How many customer complaints had they received about the product in question? Had his team reviewed internal safety reports? Did he personally approve marketing claims? At first, he answered with practiced corporate vagueness. "Our legal department handles that. I trust my team. We comply with all regulations." But she kept drilling, calmly, patiently, like a surgeon removing layers of padding to reach the truth. And slowly, the mask slipped. Under questioning, it became clear he hadn't read the subpoena thoroughly. He'd assumed his lawyers would handle it. He didn't know the details of the safety concerns because no one had briefed him, because no one dared. His entire operation ran on layers of insulation, shielding him from anything unpleasant or inconvenient. The judge didn't gloat. She didn't raise her voice. She just kept asking, "And did you know?" Until the answers painted a picture. a man so surrounded by yes-men that he'd forgotten how to hear no. In the gallery, a young law student scribbled notes furiously. She'd grown up in a neighborhood where people avoided court because they felt unwelcome, powerless. Watching this billionaire squirm under simple, fair questions felt like justice in real time, not punishment but accountability. Meanwhile, flashes of the judge's own past flickered in her mind, not as distraction but as grounding. She remembered her first courtroom appearance as a public defender, wearing a borrowed suit, voice shaking as she argued for a client who couldn't afford bail. She remembered being talked over, ignored, even mocked, just for being a woman of color in a system that wasn't built for her. But she stayed. She learned. She earned her place not through wealth but through relentless integrity. Now, decades later, she held the gavel. And she used it not to crush but to clarify. After another hour of testimony, she paused. The room was warm, the air thick with unspoken tension. She looked directly at the billionaire, not with anger, but with something closer to sadness. "You built something impressive," she said quietly. "But power without responsibility is just noise. And noise doesn't build anything that lasts." He looked down. For the first time, his confidence wasn't armor. It was a burden. Then she announced another short recess. But again, asked him to stay behind. This time, he didn't question it. As the courtroom emptied, he sat alone with his thoughts. Outside, the sky had turned gray. Rain tapped softly against the windows. He thought about his kids, what they'd think if they saw him like this. Not the headlines, not the money, but the man who couldn't bring himself to stand for a judge who'd spent her life fighting for people like them. Back in her chambers, the judge made a call, not to the press, not to higher-ups, but to the clerk who managed community outreach. "Is the civil rights exhibit still up in the courthouse archives?" she asked. "Yes, Your Honor, through the end of the month." "Good," she said. "I think it's time someone saw it." When court resumed, she didn't return to the subpoena. Instead, she turned to the court reporter. "Would you please read aloud the transcript from U.S. District Court, Eastern District, 1963, case number 4872? The testimony of Attorney Eleanor Whitmore." The reporter blinked, surprised, but nodded. As the words filled the room, words from a black woman lawyer who'd been denied the right to speak in that very courthouse, told to wait outside until the men are finished, the billionaire's face changed. He'd heard of that era, of course, but hearing it here in this space made it real, not history, not a lesson, but a wound that had taken generations to heal, and he'd just treated that healing like a joke. The judge let the words hang in the air. No commentary, no lecture, just truth spoken plainly. When it ended, she looked at him one last time. "Respect isn't about me," she said. "It's about honoring the struggle of everyone who fought to make this room fairer than it was yesterday." He didn't speak, but for the first time he understood, and outside the world kept turning. But inside that courtroom, something had quietly shifted forever. The moment the gavel tapped, soft, not sharp, the billionaire felt something unfamiliar: shame. Not the kind that flares hot and loud, but the quiet, heavy kind that settles in your chest and makes you rethink everything. He didn't say a word as the courtroom emptied. He just sat there, hands folded in his lap, staring at the floor like it might swallow him whole. Outside, the rain had stopped, but the air still carried that damp, clean smell that follows a storm. Reporters huddled near the courthouse steps, phones raised, voices low but urgent. Someone had recorded part of the hearing, not the whole thing, just enough. And by the time he stepped out the side entrance, shielded by an umbrella held by a nervous assistant, his face was already flashing across news feeds and social media. Billionaire. Disrespects federal judge, gets history lesson instead of jail time. Judge shuts down arrogance with civil rights. Transcript. Power meets principle in courtroom showdown. He didn't read the headlines. He didn't need to. He could feel it in the way his driver wouldn't meet his eyes, in the silence of his car ride back to the office. Even the city seemed different, less like his playground, more like a place full of people who'd just seen him exposed for what he really was. Not a visionary, not a disruptor, just a man who forgot how to be human. Back in the courthouse, the judge changed out of her robe and walked down to the basement archives. The exhibit she'd referenced was small. Just a few panels, some faded photographs, a glass case with a worn leather briefcase that once belonged to a black attorney who'd argued cases in that very building during the 1950s. She stood there for a long time, reading the quotes on the wall. One stuck with her. They wouldn't let me sit at the council table. So I stood, and I spoke anyway. She didn't do what she did for attention. She didn't even do it for him. She did it because someone had to remind the world, and maybe herself, that courts aren't just about rulings and penalties. They're about memory, about dignity, about making sure the mistakes of the past aren't repeated by people who think they're too important to learn from them. Later that afternoon, a young intern, a first-year law student from a community college, working her first summer in the legal system, knocked softly on the judge's door. She'd been assigned to deliver some files, but she lingered. "Your Honor," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "I just wanted to say, thank you." The judge looked up from her desk. "For what?" "For showing us that respect still matters. That the law isn't just for the powerful." The judge smiled. Not the kind you see in photos, but a real one, tired but warm. "The law only works," she said, "when everyone believes it applies to them. Even the ones who think they're above it." The intern nodded, eyes bright. She left quietly, but the moment stayed with the judge long after the files were filed and the day was done. Meanwhile, across town, the billionaire sat alone in his penthouse office. The view was stunning, skyline glittering, river winding below, but he didn't see it. His phone buzzed nonstop. His board wanted an emergency call. His PR team had drafted 3 apology statements, each more polished than the last. But none of them felt right. Because this wasn't about optics. It was about something deeper. He thought about the transcript, about the woman who wasn't allowed to sit. He'd never considered that the right to stand in a courtroom, even just to stand, was once a hard-won victory. He'd treated it like a formality, a silly tradition. But it wasn't. It was a promise that in this room everyone starts equal. His assistant knocked gently. "Sir, the board is waiting," he waved her off. "Tell them I'll call in 10. Alone again, he opened his laptop and typed, "Civil rights and federal court history." He clicked on articles, watched old interviews, read about lawyers who'd walked into hostile courtrooms just to prove they belonged. For the first time in years, he wasn't searching for an advantage or a loophole. He was searching for understanding. That night, he didn't go to his usual dinner spot or call his usual circle. Instead, he drove, no driver, no security, to a part of the city he rarely visited. He parked near a community center that housed a legal aid clinic. He didn't go in. He just sat in his car, watching people come and go. A mother with 2 kids, an elderly man with a cane, a young woman clutching a folder of papers like it held her future. He thought about his own legal team, dozens of high-priced attorneys who smoothed every path, erased every risk. These people had one overworked lawyer and a stack of unpaid bills. And yet they showed up. They believed the system could still work for them. He didn't deserve that kind of faith. Not after today. Back at the courthouse, the judge finished her last case of the day, a small landlord-tenant dispute, and packed her briefcase. As she walked out, a janitor nodded at her. "Long day, Your Honor?" "Worth it," she said simply. She didn't check her phone until she was in her car. Dozens of messages, some angry, accusing her of grandstanding, but most were grateful. Teachers, nurses, veterans, students, all saying the same thing. "Thank you for reminding us that decency still has a place in power." She turned off her phone and drove home through quiet streets. No cameras followed her. No headlines bore her name. And that was how she liked it. She wasn't in this for fame. She was in it for the quiet moments, the ones no one sees. When someone finally understands that fairness isn't weakness, it's strength. The next morning, the billionaire didn't go to his office. He called his head of legal and said, "Pull all the internal reports on that product. Every complaint, every test result. I want to read them myself." His lawyer was stunned. "You've never asked for that before." "I know," he said. "That's the problem." He spent the day reading. Page after page of customer concerns, flagged emails, internal warnings that had been buried under layers of corporate speak. He saw how easy it was to ignore the truth when you're insulated from consequences. By evening, he made a decision. Not for the press, not for damage control, but because, for the first time, he felt responsible, not just for his company, but for the people who trusted it. He drafted a short email to his executive team. We're going to do the right thing. Not because we have to, but because we should. And then he did something even more unusual. He wrote a letter, not public, not performative, to the judge. Just 3 paragraphs. No excuses, no justifications. Just, thank you for holding the line. I needed to hear what you said. I won't forget it. He didn't send it right away. He sat with it for a day, wondering if it mattered, wondering if she'd even read it. But that wasn't the point. The point was that he meant it, and in a world full of noise, that quiet sincerity was the rarest thing of all. The fallout didn't come with sirens or headlines screaming scandal. It came quietly, like a slow leak in a boat no one noticed was sinking. At first, the billionaire thought the worst was over. He'd been embarrassed, yes, but he'd handled it. He'd even sent that letter. Surely that was enough, but the world had other ideas. By the end of the week, his company's stock dipped, not dramatically, but noticeably. Investors started asking uncomfortable questions in earnings calls. Not about profits, but about culture. How do we know leadership respects the law? One asked. Another followed up. Is this a pattern? His usual charm didn't work this time. People weren't buying the performance anymore. Inside the office, the mood shifted too. Employees who once wore company hoodies with pride now spoke in hushed tones near the coffee machine. A junior designer posted a vague but pointed message on social media. Respect isn't optional. Not in court. Not at work. It got thousands of likes. No one tagged the company, but everyone knew. His board called an emergency meeting. Not to fire him yet, but to reassess governance. That phrase alone sent a chill through his spine. In corporate speak, it meant they were losing faith. And losing faith in him meant losing faith in the entire brand he'd built on the idea that rules were for losers. He tried to fix it the old way, with money and spin. His PR team drafted a statement about learning moments and commitment to civic values. They even suggested a donation to a legal nonprofit, something flashy, with photos and a press release. But when he read the draft, something felt hollow. He remembered the faces outside that legal aid clinic, the tired eyes, the worn shoes, the quiet hope that the system might finally listen. This wasn't about optics. It was about repair, so he scrapped the whole plan. Instead, he called a small group of employees, people from customer service, product safety, compliance, and asked them one question: what would make this right? They were stunned. No one at his level had ever asked them that before. One woman who'd worked there for 12 years said, "Stop hiding complaints. Publish them. Let people see we're listening." Another added, "Fund real legal help for customers who've been hurt, not just settlements, but actual support." He listened, really listened, and for the first time he didn't think about how it would look. He thought about how it would feel to the people who trusted his products, who believed his promises. Meanwhile, the judge heard none of this. She didn't follow the news about him. She didn't care about his stock price or his boardroom drama. She was too busy doing her job. That week, she presided over a case involving a single mother facing eviction after her landlord refused to fix a broken heater in winter. The woman had no lawyer, just a stack of photos and a trembling voice. The judge didn't rush her. She asked gentle questions. She made sure the court interpreter spoke slowly. And when the landlord's attorney tried to dismiss the case as minor, she cut in. "Cold isn't minor when you're sleeping with your children in coats." She ruled in the woman's favor, ordering repairs and back rent compensation. No fanfare, no cameras, just justice served quietly. Afterward, as she walked back to her chambers, a young public defender stopped her in the hallway. "You gave her a chance," he said. "That matters more than you know." She nodded. "It's not about me giving her a chance. It's about the system finally working like it's supposed to." Back in the billionaire's world, the pressure kept building. A major retail partner paused new orders. A longtime investor quietly sold shares. Even his closest advisors started speaking in careful, measured tones, as if afraid to trigger another misstep. But instead of retreating, he leaned in. He approved the release of all internal safety reports related to the disputed product, unedited, unfiltered. He authorized a new customer advocacy team with real power to investigate complaints. And he quietly transferred funds not to a flashy charity, but to 3 community legal aid organizations with no press, no branding, just support. One of those organizations was the very clinic he'd sat outside of that rainy night. He didn't tell anyone, not even his assistant, because this time it wasn't about being seen. It was about being better. Still, word got out. Not from him, from the people on the ground. A legal aid lawyer posted a thank you note, without naming names, about an unexpected donation that would keep their doors open for another year. A customer service rep mentioned in a team meeting that leadership had finally listened. Slowly, the narrative began to shift, not because of a press release, but because real people felt a change. At home, the billionaire sat with his kids one evening. His youngest asked, "Dad, were you in trouble at court?" He didn't dodge it. "Yeah," he said, "I was. I forgot to show respect when I should have." "Why?" He thought for a long moment. "Because I got used to people treating me like I was more important than I am. But I'm not. No one is." His child nodded, satisfied with the answer, and went back to drawing. But the words stayed with him. No one is. That simple truth had been buried under years of success, ego, and insulation. Now it felt like the only thing that mattered. The judge, unaware of any of this, spent her weekend grading papers for a law mentorship program she ran for first-generation students. One essay stood out. A young woman wrote about watching the courtroom moment online and realizing, for the first time, that judges could be both firm and kind. "I used to think the law was cold," she wrote. "Now I see it can have a heartbeat." The judge underlined that sentence and wrote in the margin, "Keep that heartbeat. The system needs it." On Monday, the billionaire returned to work, but differently. He walked through the office without his usual entourage. He stopped to talk to people he'd never noticed before. The security guard who'd worked there 20 years, the intern who refilled the printer paper, the engineer who flagged a safety issue months ago and was ignored. He didn't apologize to each one. That would have been performative. Instead, he asked, "What do you need to do your job well?" And then he listened. That same day, the judge received a plain white envelope with no return address. Inside was a handwritten note, just 3 paragraphs, no signature. It read, "Your Honor, I didn't understand what respect meant until you showed me it wasn't about you. It was about everyone who came before us. I'm trying to learn, not for show. For real. Thank you for holding the line when it mattered." She read it twice, then folded it carefully and placed it in the top drawer of her desk, next to the world's okayest judge mug and a photo of her mother, who'd cleaned offices so she could go to law school. She didn't know if the words were enough, but she hoped they were a start, because real change doesn't happen in headlines. It happens in quiet choices in boardrooms, in courtrooms, in living rooms, when someone finally chooses humility over pride. And sometimes, that's enough to shift the whole world. The morning of the final hearing was clear and cool, the kind of autumn day that feels like a fresh start. He arrived early. No limo, no entourage, just a quiet car and a driver who barely spoke. He wore a simple navy suit, no flashy watch, no designer tie. He carried a folder, not a phone. And when he stepped into the courthouse, he didn't scan the room for cameras or reporters. He just walked in, head down, like someone who finally understood the weight of the place. Inside, the courtroom was already filling. Not with celebrities or influencers, but with ordinary people. Tenants, small business owners, a few students from the local law school. They weren't here for drama. They were here because this was where their lives intersected with the law, and they trusted it enough to show up. When the bailiff called the court to order, everyone rose. And this time he stood before anyone else, smoothly, quietly, without hesitation. He kept his eyes forward, not at the bench, not at the crowd, just straight ahead, as if the act itself was enough. The judge entered a moment later. She wore the same calm expression as always, but something in her posture softened when she saw him standing, not because she needed the gesture, but because it meant he'd finally understood what it was for. She took her seat. "Be seated," she said. And just like that, the hearing began. There were no fireworks, no grand speeches. The lawyers presented the terms of a settlement they'd worked out over the past weeks. The company would release all internal safety data, fund a consumer legal education program, and establish an independent review panel for future product complaints. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. And it was more than anyone expected. The judge reviewed the documents carefully, asked a few precise questions, then nodded. This agreement reflects accountability and a commitment to public trust. The court accepts it. Then she turned to him. Do you have anything to add, Mr. Last Name? He stood again, not because he had to, but because he wanted to. He didn't look at his lawyers. He looked at her. Just that I'm sorry, he said, voice low but clear. Not because I was caught, but because I should have known better. I let my success blind me to something simple. That respect isn't earned by wealth. It's given by how you treat the system that protects us all. A few people in the gallery shifted, not in judgment but in recognition. They'd heard empty apologies before. This one felt different because it wasn't polished. It was human. The judge held his gaze for a long moment. Then she gave a small nod. Apologies mean little without action. But from what I've seen these past weeks, you've chosen action. That matters. With that, she closed the case. No fines. No jail time. Just a quiet resolution built on changed behavior, not punishment. As people filed out, he lingered for a moment. He watched the judge gather her papers, speak briefly with the clerk, then walk toward her chambers without a glance back. She didn't need his thanks. She didn't need his redemption arc. She'd done her job and done it well. He left the courthouse the same way he came in, quietly. But something inside him had settled. The hunger for attention, the need to prove he was above the rules, it was gone. In its place was something quieter, steadier, responsibility. A week later, a small announcement appeared on the website of a national scholarship foundation. A new fund had been created to support law students from underrepresented backgrounds, first generation, low income, or from communities historically excluded from the legal profession. The donor chose to remain anonymous. The only detail shared was the fund's name, the Bench Scholarship. No press release, no logo, just opportunity, offered without expectation. Around the same time, the judge received a letter from the dean of a local law school. One of their students, the daughter of a janitor, the first in her family to attend college, had just been awarded a full scholarship through a new program. The student wrote a note of thanks, saying she wanted to become a public defender, because someone showed me that the law can be kind. The judge tucked the letter into her desk drawer, next to the unsigned note she'd received weeks before. She didn't connect the dots out loud. She didn't need to. Some things are understood without words. Life returned to its rhythm. The billionaire went back to running his company, but differently. He sat in on customer service calls. He read every complaint. He made sure the new review panel had real power, not just a title. His board noticed the change. So did his employees. So did the customers and the judge. She kept doing what she'd always done. Presiding over eviction cases, business disputes, family custody hearings, each one treated with the same care, the same belief that fairness matters even when no one is watching. One evening, as she walked out of the courthouse at dusk, briefcase in hand, a young intern caught up to her near the parking lot. Your Honor, the intern said, a little breathless. I just wanted to say I got accepted into law school. Full ride, the judge smiled. You earned that. Not me. But you showed me it was possible, the intern said. That someone like me belongs in those rooms. The judge paused. Looked at the young woman, nervous, hopeful, full of the same fire she once had. Then go in, she said gently. And when you do, stand tall. Not for me, for everyone who couldn't. They parted ways under a sky streaked with orange and purple. The city hummed around them, cars, voices, life moving forward. No cameras. No headlines. Just two people, one at the start of her journey, one near the end of hers, connected by a simple truth. That dignity is built one quiet choice at a time. Back at his office, the billionaire signed the final paperwork for the scholarship fund. Then he closed his laptop, turned off the lights, and walked out. Not to a gala or a board meeting, but to a small diner he used to pass every day without noticing. He ordered coffee and sat by the window, watching people come and go. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like the center of the universe. And that was okay, because real change doesn't roar, it whispers. It shows up early. It stands when it's asked. It listens more than it speaks. And sometimes in a quiet courtroom or a humble diner or a law student's notebook, it's enough to change everything.